Ravel Thorn crouched in the corner of the great trade station, his clothes ragged and dirty, his stomach empty for the third day in a row. The crowd around him chattered and laughed, their voices sharp and cruel. Aliens of every shape and size passed by, staring at him like he was nothing more than an insect to be crushed underfoot. They mocked him openly, calling him weak, useless, and a mistake of evolution. He had learned to lower his head and say nothing. To respond would only bring more ridicule. Every day was the same. The guards brought scraps of food, barely enough to keep him alive, and forced him to beg for them in front of the jeering audience. "Look at the human," they said. "Even his pride is small." Ravel felt the weight of every gaze, every word. He had come from a small colony on a distant human world, hoping to find work and purpose. Now he was trapped in a place that saw him as worthless, as a creature not worthy of respect or life. Ravel remembered better days, though those memories seemed almost like dreams now. He had laughed with his friends, worked in the sun, and imagined a life full of discovery and hope. Here, in the cold steel corridors of the station, all of that felt like a lie. Hunger gnawed at his body, and the endless mockery gnawed at his mind. Still, he refused to give up completely. Something inside him, a quiet spark, refused to die. The other prisoners whispered warnings. "Don't hope," they said. "It only hurts more." They were broken already, their spirits crushed under the weight of endless abuse. Ravel listened, but he did not join them in despair. He had learned to survive by noticing the smallest details. How the guards moved when the food was handed out, what the station's workers ignored. He noticed patterns others overlooked. Even now, in his lowly state, he felt the faint thrill of understanding things others could not see. Today the guards were in a particularly cruel mood. They shoved him into the center of the crowded hall, laughing as he stumbled forward. The crowd jeered, throwing scraps and insults. Ravel lowered himself to his knees, keeping his eyes on the ground. His stomach screamed for food, but he refused to beg too loudly. Every word would have been a reminder of his humiliation. "Look at him," shouted a large four-armed alien. "The human cannot even stand for himself." Ravel felt the heat of shame, but he held himself still. He refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break completely. Inside, his mind worked quickly. He calculated the timing of the guards' patrols, the shifts in the crowd, the way the station systems functioned. Even in the worst conditions, humans had a gift, the ability to think, to plan, to survive against impossible odds. He clung to that thought like a lifeline. As the crowd continued to mock him, Ravel noticed a slight change. One of the alien supervisors was distracted, speaking with another guard. That small lapse created an opportunity. If he could just move at the right moment, he could avoid some of the punishment, maybe even find a little food that fell unnoticed. His hands trembled from hunger, but his mind stayed sharp. He edged sideways, keeping his movements slow and careful. The crowd barely noticed, too focused on their laughter. One guard raised an eyebrow, but Ravel froze in place until the attention passed. Little by little, he maneuvered himself toward the edge of the hall, where leftover scraps often fell. He picked up a small piece of stale bread, barely enough to fill his stomach, and swallowed it slowly, savoring every crumb. It was nothing, but it was a small victory. Ravel's mind drifted as he chewed. He thought of his family, of his home world. They had taught him to never give up, to keep moving forward even when the world seemed against him. He would remember those lessons even here, even now. The crowd might mock him, the guards might beat him, and the hunger might claw at his belly, but he could survive. Survival was not just about strength. It was about knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to think ahead. Hours passed. The hall slowly emptied, leaving Ravel alone with the cold metal walls and the faint hum of the station. He found a quiet corner and pressed himself against it, closing his eyes for a moment. Pain and exhaustion pulled at him, but he forced himself to breathe deeply. Tomorrow would be the same, but he had learned something today. Even in the lowest point, he could find a way to endure. The station's lights flickered above him, casting long shadows across the floor. In those shadows, Ravel imagined a different future. A place where humans were not mocked, not starved, not forced to beg for scraps. He imagined a life where his mind and courage could matter. It seemed impossible, but it was a spark. And as long as that spark remained, he was not completely broken. A distant sound echoed down the corridor, footsteps of guards returning, perhaps to continue their torment. Ravel straightened his back slightly, his eyes narrowing. He would face them again. He would survive again. And maybe one day the world would see him not as a weak, starving human, but as someone whose life had meaning. Even in the deepest humiliation, even at the lowest point, a human could endure. And Ravel Thorn, though mocked and starved, still carried that truth in his heart. He whispered to himself quietly, almost as a promise, "I will not be nothing. I will not be forgotten." Ravel Thorn awoke before dawn, his body stiff from the hard floor, his stomach still empty. The morning lights of the station flickered weakly, casting long shadows through the halls. Today was different. Today the council had announced a new event, the test of worth. It was meant to humiliate prisoners further, showing all who watched that the weak were not needed in the galaxy. Ravel's heart pounded, not from fear, but from a strange spark of determination. The hall was massive, filled with platforms, strange machinery and creatures of all shapes and sizes. Each prisoner was to complete a series of tasks, puzzles, labor challenges and tests of strength, while being judged by the council and observed by the public. Failure meant disappearance and success meant mere survival. Most species were confident, flexing and showing off, while the human, Ravel Thorn, stood at the edge, trembling slightly, but steadying himself with deep breaths. A guard stepped forward and shouted, "Begin!" The first task was simple for strong species: move massive crates from one platform to another. The crowd cheered and laughed at the human who could barely lift the crates without strain. He bent down, examining the weight and shape, noticing small handles and grooves that others ignored. He grunted, using his body cleverly, leveraging his weight to roll one crate partially, then push it with steady rhythm. Slowly the crate moved. Not fast, not elegant, but it moved. The crowd murmured, confused. A human? Doing what even some aliens struggled to do. The next challenge was more complex. A puzzle of lights and circuits that required attention to detail and logic. Many species, strong but impatient, pushed and pulled randomly, failing repeatedly. Ravel's hunger clawed at him, but his mind worked faster than his empty belly would allow his body to. He crouched before the puzzle, observing the colors, the patterns, the small inconsistencies that others overlooked. Step by step, he connected wires in the right order, activated the circuits, and the lights turned green. The crowd gasped. No human had ever completed this challenge, but here he was, slowly earning notice. Even as he succeeded, the council whispered among themselves. "A human?" they muttered. "Impossible." Their surprise became irritation. For them, humans were insignificant. They could not imagine a species surviving, let alone achieving, in a place built to crush the weak. Yet Ravel pressed on, ignoring their voices. He focused on what he could control: observation, patience, and clever thinking. These were weapons his body alone could never provide, but in a world blind to intellect, they were powerful. The next task tested endurance. Prisoners were sent into a chamber filled with shifting floors and timed obstacles. Aliens with 4, 6, or more limbs jumped and climbed with ease, while Ravel struggled to keep his balance. His hands scraped against metal, his knees bruised, but he noticed something: the patterns of movement repeated at regular intervals. Timing, he realized, mattered more than strength. Using careful steps, he navigated the chamber, avoiding traps, and reached the exit without falling. The crowd was silent. A human had passed where many stronger species had failed. By the end of the day, Ravel was exhausted, weak, and hungry. His body ached, and the small amount of food he had scavenged in the hall barely kept him standing. Yet he had done what no one expected. He had survived every trial, completing tasks in ways that did not require brute strength but required thinking, planning, and endurance. The crowd, which once laughed, now whispered. Some were confused, others angry. How could a human, weak, starving, mocked, be performing feats no one thought possible? The council called the prisoners forward, their faces stern, their eyes cold. "You may live," one of them said to Ravel, a faint note of disbelief in his voice. "But do not think this changes your place." Ravel bowed his head, hiding the faint smile on his lips. Survival was not victory, yet it was proof. A human's life, even a starving one, was not worthless. As the prisoners were dismissed, whispers spread among the crowd and the other species. Some muttered that humans might have hidden potential. Others argued that Ravel had only luck on his side. Ravel, listening to their talk, did not respond. He did not need their approval. He had learned the most important lesson. Even when the world is set against you, even when mocked and starved, a mind that refuses to give up is more powerful than the strongest arms or sharpest claws. That night, Ravel sat alone in the small cell assigned to him after the trials. He examined the tools, machines, and strange devices around him. Every detail mattered. Every small discovery could become a key to survival or, perhaps, escape. His stomach growled, but he closed his eyes and pictured what he could do if given a chance. A world where humans were not mocked, a place where his mind and courage could matter. Some prisoners had lost hope, but Ravel kept it alive. He whispered to himself quietly, almost like a promise, "I will survive. I will prove my worth. And one day they will see that a human is not nothing." Hunger, pain, and fatigue surrounded him, yet the spark in his heart burned brightly. It was the only thing he had, but it was enough. Outside the cell, distant sounds of the station's engines and guards echoed. Somewhere, aliens boasted of their victories, unaware of the quiet human who had already survived more than they could imagine. Tomorrow the council might challenge him again. They might try to break him further. But for now, Ravel Thorn knew one undeniable truth. Even in the cruelest trials, a human's mind and spirit could shine, quietly but powerfully against any odds. And in the stillness of that night, he felt a faint thrill, a hint of hope. The test of worth had not made him weak. It had shown him a truth stronger than fear or hunger, that even a human, mocked, starved, and forced to beg, could hold a value the galaxy could not ignore. The station shivered with alarm. A sudden, piercing siren cut through the corridors, echoing off the metal walls. The council chambers buzzed with panic as reports came in. A critical reactor in the core of the station was failing. Energy readings spiked, containment fields flickered, and the entire station risked destruction. Aliens shouted over one another, each claiming they should lead the repair effort. Pride and ego clouded their judgment. No one wanted the danger. No one wanted the risk. Ravel Thorn, sitting in his small dark cell, heard the alarm. Hunger and exhaustion clung to his body, but his mind was alert. The patterns of the station's systems, the hum of the machinery, and the locations of maintenance tunnels were all familiar to him. In the past, he had cleaned and maintained sections of the station. He understood it in a way most could not. And now, that knowledge mattered more than strength or skill. He stepped out of the cell, unnoticed at first. Guards were rushing past, yelling at prisoners to stay in their quarters. Ravel moved quickly but carefully, keeping to shadows and quiet corners. He reached the central hall just as the council assembled in panic. "We need someone to enter the core," one of them demanded. "It is too dangerous." The crowd of onlookers, mostly prisoners and minor staff, murmured nervously. No one stepped forward. Ravel's heart beat fast. This was more than a test of worth, it was a choice. Step forward and he might die. Step back and countless lives could be lost. Yet something inside him urged him forward. He knew he could do this. Not because he was stronger, not because he had armor or weapons, but because he could think, adapt, and survive where others would fail. "I'll do it," he said, his voice calm but firm. The hall fell silent. Aliens turned to stare at him, their eyes wide with disbelief. The council laughed, thinking it was a joke. "The human?" one of them barked. "He is weak, starved, and useless. He cannot survive 5 minutes in the core." Ravel did not flinch. He only nodded. "I know the station. I know the systems. I can stabilize the reactor." His stomach twisted with fear, but he swallowed it down. Fear was a tool, he reminded himself. It sharpened focus, it demanded attention. Panic was useless, action was necessary. He moved toward the elevator leading to the reactor core. Guards blocked his path at first, unsure if they should stop him or let him proceed. Some muttered that his life was worth nothing anyway. Others feared he might actually succeed. Ravel ignored them. His mind calculated every step, the timing of the doors, the pressure of the airlocks, the paths he had memorized during maintenance. He was prepared for things no one else had noticed. The reactor chamber was immense, glowing with unstable energy, walls vibrating with power surges. The air was thick and hot. Ravel's stomach ached, his legs shook, but he pushed forward. He reached the control panel, examining the blinking lights and cascading warnings. Every second counted. Every wrong move could trigger a meltdown. He began his work, moving with careful precision. Panels that seemed random to the untrained eye had patterns. Switches that were ignored by the stronger species now became tools in his hands. He rerouted power, stabilized cooling systems, and corrected energy flows. Sweat ran down his face, mixed with grime and exhaustion. Yet he did not stop. The station's alarms blared, but his focus was absolute. Outside, the council watched, disbelief turning into panic, then fear. Some began shouting instructions, others tried to push stronger species forward, but no one could match Ravel's understanding. He had spent months, years, observing the station in ways no one else had. Now that knowledge saved lives. Time stretched. Ravel's muscles screamed, and his hands were raw from working the controls. Sparks flew and a surge threatened to knock him back. He gritted his teeth, recalling the lessons of patience and observation. He adjusted, recalculated, and pressed forward. Step by step, system stabilized, energy flow returned to normal, and the reactor's warning lights dimmed. The station's vibrations lessened. Finally, Ravel collapsed to his knees, exhausted beyond belief but alive. Around him, the chamber hummed with steady energy. Outside, the council and the crowd were silent. No applause, no cheers, just stunned disbelief. The human who had been mocked, starved, and considered worthless had saved them all. The guards approached cautiously, unsure what to do. Some offered help, others stared, dumbfounded. Ravel looked up, exhausted but his eyes bright. He had proven something in that chamber. Strength was not only measured in arms or claws. Intelligence, courage, and determination could matter more than brute force. A single human had done what countless stronger species could not. As he was led back to a safe area, whispers spread through the station. The human, he survived the core? Impossible. Yet it happened. The crowd began to murmur, their mockery replaced by awe and uncertainty. For the first time, many species considered that humans might be more than they appeared. Ravel, though weak, felt a strange sense of triumph. Not pride, not arrogance, but clarity. He had chosen to act when no one else would. He had risked everything, not for glory, not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do. And in that choice he discovered his value, something no council, no mocking crowd could take away. That night, as Ravel rested in a quiet chamber, he thought about the day's events. His body was battered, but his spirit burned with determination. He realized that worth was not given by others but shown through actions. And sometimes, the smallest, weakest being could make the biggest difference. In the darkness, he whispered quietly to himself, almost like a promise. They see me now, but they have not seen all I can do. I am more than they know. Hunger, exhaustion, and pain still clung to him, but they could not touch the truth he had discovered. A human's life, when used wisely, could be priceless. And in that quiet moment, Ravel Thorn understood something profound. The galaxy might mock him, starve him, and force him to beg. But when the choice mattered, when courage and thought were all that stood between life and destruction, a human could shine brighter than any stronger species. The station had learned it now. The council would not forget it. Ravel Thorn woke slowly, his body stiff and sore from the events of the reactor core. He could still feel the heat of the chamber on his skin, the memory of sparks flying, the vibrations that had nearly thrown him off balance. Hunger gnawed at him and exhaustion pulled at every muscle, but he did not feel afraid. He had survived what no one thought possible. The station was stable and countless lives had been saved. Word of his actions spread quickly. Screens in the hallways showed footage of a human, small and starving, navigating the reactor's dangerous core. The council, who had mocked and dismissed him, now whispered anxiously among themselves. Some argued he had merely been lucky. Others, more thoughtful, realized the truth. The human had succeeded because of intelligence, observation, and courage, not strength. Prisoners who had once laughed at him now watched with awe. Some muttered quietly to each other, unable to comprehend how a being they had considered weak could accomplish what they could not. Ravel ignored their whispers. He was tired of thinking about what others believed. What mattered was that he had acted when no one else could. That choice, that action had been his alone. The council gathered to speak with him. Their faces were a mix of disbelief, curiosity, and a hint of respect. You survived the core, one said slowly. You risked your life. You saved the station. The words sounded strange coming from them. Ravel nodded, keeping his expression calm. He had no need for their praise. Their approval was meaningless compared to the truth he carried in his heart. His life, his mind, and his choices had value. You could have died, another council member said. Why did you act? Why risk everything? Ravel looked at them steadily. Because it needed to be done, he said simply. Someone had to act. I knew what to do. I chose to act even when no one else would. His voice carried a quiet strength. It was not arrogance. It was clarity. The council struggled to comprehend his words. Most had always measured worth by strength, by status, or by fear. Ravel had shown them something new. Worth could be measured in courage, in thought, in the willingness to act for others despite danger and suffering. A human, starving and mocked, had done what many powerful species could not. The crowd outside the council chambers grew curious. Aliens gathered to watch the human who had stabilized the reactor. Some were skeptical, others amazed. Rumors began to spread. The human was clever, brave, and precise. Perhaps humans were not as weak as the galaxy had long believed. Ravel felt their eyes on him, but he did not seek their admiration. Their opinions were not important. What mattered was what he had done, and the knowledge that a single human could change the outcome of an entire station. The council offered rewards, food, safe quarters and privileges that no prisoner had before. Ravel accepted only a small amount of food and a safe place to rest. He did not want power, not yet. He wanted the chance to think, to plan, to survive. That was enough for now. Others clamored for more, but Ravel understood something they did not. Survival was not about possessions or status. It was about choice, action and value. In the quiet of the evening, Ravel walked through the station's corridors. The metal walls gleamed under artificial lights, and shadows stretched long across the floors. Prisoners and workers whispered as he passed, some in fear, some in admiration. A few nodded quietly as if acknowledging a truth they had only just realized. A human could make a difference when it mattered most. Ravel paused at a maintenance corridor he had once cleaned. He remembered the tools, the pathways, and the machines he had studied in secret during his days of labor. That knowledge had saved lives. It had given him purpose when all else seemed lost. And now he knew purpose was more powerful than strength. It was a quiet force, unseen, yet capable of changing the course of events. Night fell over the station, though artificial lights never truly dimmed. Ravel rested in his small room, the soft hum of the station's engines surrounding him. He thought about the day, about the faces of the council, the guards, and the crowd. Many still did not understand what they had witnessed. Many still saw him as weak. But he knew the truth. A life, even one that seemed worthless to others, could be more powerful than titles, strength, or fear. In that quiet room, he allowed himself a small smile. He had survived, he had acted, and he had proven something vital. A human's life had value that no one could take away. Hunger and exhaustion still clung to him, but they were insignificant compared to the spark of understanding that burned within him. He whispered to himself softly, almost as a promise, "They may see my body as weak, but my choices are stronger than any weapon. My life is worth more than they know." Outside, the station continued its endless rhythm. Aliens and prisoners moved through the corridors, unaware of the quiet power that had just changed everything. And in the center of it all, a human, starved, mocked, and nearly broken, had proven that life, when guided by courage and thought, was priceless. Ravel Thorn knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of endurance, and new moments of doubt. But he also knew something else. No matter what came, he had discovered a truth no council, no species, and no mocking crowd could erase. Strength was not only measured in arms or claws. Sometimes it was measured in choices, courage, and the will to act. And in the quiet hum of the station, as lights flickered softly above, Ravel Thorn slept, ready to face whatever came next, carrying a single unshakable truth. A human's life could shine brighter than any other, if only it chose to act when it mattered most. Ravel Thorn woke to the hum of the station, but it felt different now. The halls, once filled with mockery and sneers, were quieter, uncertain. His actions in the reactor core had changed something. The council, the guards, even the prisoners, many of them whispered in shock and awe. The human who had been starved, mocked, and forced to beg had acted when no one else would. He had saved lives. And that simple fact had shifted the way everyone looked at him. The council called him once more, not with threats or ridicule, but with serious, quiet tones. "You have proven something," one said slowly. "We do not fully understand it, but it cannot be ignored. Your actions have value." Ravel nodded. He did not need their praise. Value was not something others could grant. It was shown through action, courage, and choice. And he had shown it in the most undeniable way. Outside the council chambers, whispers grew louder. Prisoners and minor species looked at him differently. Some nodded in respect, others in disbelief. Rumors spread quickly. A human, once considered weak and insignificant, had saved an entire station from destruction. It was difficult for many to accept. The galaxy had long looked down on humans, calling them frail and unimportant. Now that belief was faltering. The council offered him wealth, status, and a comfortable life. They offered privileges that no prisoner had ever received before. Ravel considered their offers but accepted only a small portion: food, rest, and the freedom to move without fear. He wanted none of the trappings of power. He had learned that true value was not measured in possessions, in titles, or in praise. True value was in choice, the ability to act when it mattered, the courage to risk oneself for others, and the will to survive against impossible odds. He walked through the station corridors, seeing eyes that once mocked him now filled with uncertainty. Some species hesitated before speaking. Others observed quietly, unsure how to treat him. Ravel ignored their attention. He did not seek validation. What mattered was that a single human had made a difference. That was more than enough. Ravel stopped near a group of human prisoners who had long suffered under the council's disdain. Their eyes widened as they saw him, hesitant, unsure if they should speak. He smiled faintly, offering them quiet reassurance. He did not need to speak loudly. Actions had always spoken louder than words. By surviving, by acting when no one else would, he had shown them something important. Humans had worth, intelligence, and courage. Even in the face of cruelty and hunger, their lives were priceless. The station began to change slowly. Guards treated prisoners with more caution. Council members paused to consider strategies instead of relying solely on brute strength, and whispers of human potential spread to distant parts of the galaxy. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A single human had caused a ripple, a reconsideration of what value truly meant. Ravel's own life remained simple. He spent his days helping where he could, observing systems and quietly teaching other humans and lesser species how to think, plan, and act. His efforts were small but powerful. He understood now that change did not always come through orders or speeches. Change came through demonstration, through quiet courage, and through the willingness to act when others could not. One evening, as the artificial lights of the station flickered softly, Ravel looked out over the central concourse. He saw beings of all species moving about, some with newfound respect, others still skeptical but none mocking him anymore. He thought of his journey, the hunger, the mockery, the fear, the endless trials, and realized something profound. Every moment of suffering, every insult, every obstacle had brought him here. Every moment had shaped his choices, his courage, and his understanding of true value. He remembered whispering to himself in the dark corners of the station, when he had been weak and alone, "I will not be nothing. I will not be forgotten." Now those words felt more real than ever. He had proven that even when a life seems insignificant, even when the galaxy mocks and starves, that life can still shine brightly. The choice to act, the courage to endure, and the intelligence to think had made him priceless. Ravel did not boast. He did not seek glory. Instead, he worked quietly to make the station safer, to ensure that others who had been mocked or considered weak would not suffer as he had. He shared what he had learned: survival, observation, courage, and clever thinking. He showed that value was not determined by appearance or status, but by action and heart. As days passed, other humans on the station began to gain recognition. Their skills, intelligence, and bravery could no longer be ignored. Ravel watched quietly, proud not of himself, but of what they were beginning to achieve. A single life had started a chain of change, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. In the quiet of his room that night, Ravel whispered softly, almost as a vow, "A life is worth more than they know. Even the weakest, the smallest, the most mocked, it can be priceless if it chooses to act." Hunger and fatigue would come again, challenges would rise, and some would still doubt him, but the truth he had shown could not be erased. Ravel Thorn had been mocked, starved, and forced to beg. But he had chosen to act, to survive, and to save countless others. In doing so, he had proven a truth the galaxy could not ignore. Human life, when guided by courage, intelligence, and choice, was priceless. And as he rested, looking toward the endless hum of the station and the stars beyond, he knew that this was only the beginning. Humans, once seen as weak and worthless, would now be seen as capable, brave, and invaluable. And he, Ravel Thorn, had shown them the way. The galaxy had learned something it would not forget. A human could choose to act, and that choice could change everything.